Good morning, everyone. I thought it would be fun to have a special report today in case you want to have something to watch besides General Conference. In today's special report, we are going to discuss Apostolic Interregnum with some details from an article by Tad Walch. He says the death of President Russell M. Nelson automatically dissolved the first presidency on Saturday night and launched an Apostolic Interregnum, a period when the Quorum of the 12 Apostles leads the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The end of a first presidency that lasted more than 7.5 years means that Presidents Dallin H. Oaks and Henry B. Eyring have returned to the Quorum of the 12. The Quorum temporarily has 14 members with the senior apostle, President Oaks, as its president. An apostolic interregnum is a rare moment in the church, Elder Jeffrey R. Holland told the Deseret News in 2018. It's a great thing in the church to say goodbye to a prophet and anticipate a new one, he said. Through all the anticipation of it all, there's never a moment when the keys are not in force, and there's never any lack of revelatory experience. It's a little bit like the Brits who say, "The king is dead, God save the king." The transition is that fast. So just to be clear, Jeff is saying that in the LDS Church, the Quorum of the 12 Apostles holds the keys of the priesthood collectively. The prophet is the only person who can exercise all of those keys. The moment the prophet dies, the right to exercise them falls back to the Quorum of the 12, with the senior apostle immediately holding the potential to become the next prophet. And the power itself never leaves the church, emphasizing that God's communication to the church doesn't stop. The senior members of the Quorum continue to have their own revelatory authority, ensuring the church is never without divine direction, even during the transition period. Back to Tad. Throughout the church's 195-year history, every apostolic interregnum has ended with the Quorum selecting the senior apostle as the next church president. President Oaks, who is 93, is therefore expected to succeed President Nelson, a friend he literally sat next to in leadership meetings for 41 years, and become the 18th prophet president of the church. The second most senior apostle becomes the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. During President Nelson's tenure, that meant President Oaks carried that title while he served as the first counselor in the first presidency. Two men served as acting president of the Quorum during that time. President M. Russell Ballard from January 2018 to his death in November of 2023, and President Jeffrey R. Holland from 2023 to Saturday. Interesting. I didn't realize that there was an actual president of the Quorum of the 12, and that if that dude is in the first presidency, the next most senior apostle is designated as acting president. I'd heard those terms, but never really paid attention. I wonder what that title even means. Are they like a bouncer? Do they break up fights amongst the brethren? Tad goes on to say seniority is determined not by age, but by service in the Quorum. President Holland, who is 84, is now the second most senior apostle and is expected to be set apart as president of the 12 unless he were called to the new first presidency when it is reorganized. If that happened, the next senior apostle, President Eyring, 92, would become acting president of the 12. So right now the succession goes Oaks, then Holland, then Eyring. Based on church precedent, the first presidency is not expected to be reorganized before General Conference this weekend, though it is possible. In the past, out of respect for the deceased church president, the first presidency has not been reorganized until after his funeral. President Nelson's funeral is scheduled on Tuesday, October 7th. President Ballard talked about that respect in a Deseret News interview during the last Apostolic Interregnum in 2018. In reverence to the deceased president, we just don't do much prior to the funeral, he said. Part of the reason is also respect for the following first presidency, he said. There's not much to talk about really, not much you can say or do or decide because there will be a new first presidency, he said. Wait, but I thought Holland said there is no gap. Back to Tad. In 2018, after the death of President Thomas S. Monson, the Apostolic Interregnum lasted for 12 days. That was the longest interregnum since the church's pioneer days. Which brings up something that I did not know. I'm not kidding. until after I left the church. The time between when Joseph Smith died and Brigham Young became prophet was 3 years and 6 months. When Brigham died, it was 3 years and 1 month before John Taylor became prophet, and when John Taylor died, it was 1 year and 9 months before Wilford Woodruff became prophet. Since then, it's just been a matter of days in between. Tad goes on to say that 2018 interregnum ended when the Quorum of the 12 set apart President Nelson as President Monson's successor during a Sunday morning meeting in the Salt Lake Temple. If the Quorum again chooses to hold its succession meeting the Sunday after the funeral, a new president might not be announced until October 12th, 13th, or 14th due to this weekend's General Conference meetings. The new church president will call 2 apostles from the Quorum to assist him in the first presidency. That will reduce the quorum to 11 members. The new church president then will be expected to name a new apostle. Generally, that has happened at general conferences, but 2 members of the quorum were called between conferences. President Holland was called in June of 1994, and Elder Patrick Kieran joined the quorum in December of 2023, which, side note, solidifies that the law of common consent in the church is dead. What is the law of common consent? The church website says, after the restoration of priesthood authority, the Lord commanded Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery not to ordain each other as elders and leaders in the church until other believers could decide by vote whether they were willing to accept Joseph and Oliver's leadership. One of Joseph's first actions at the organizational meeting of the church on April 6, 1830, was to call for such a vote. He asked those assembled to show whether they approved of him and Oliver as teachers and whether they should organize the church according to Revelation. The members voted unanimously in favor. A July 1830 revelation reiterated that all things shall be done by common consent in the church by much prayer and faith. Calling apostles without common consent of the church goes against that revelation. Back to the article. Apostles serve for life and are, according to Latter-day Saint scripture, special witnesses of Jesus Christ to the world. 3 apostles form the first presidency. 12 more make up the quorum of the 12 apostles. President Nelson and President Oaks were called as apostles together in 1984. President Nelson was designated as the senior of the 2 apostles. I did not know this until just now when I was reading it. Can you imagine if they'd been designated otherwise and we'd had Oaks before Nelson? I mean, we're about to have him anyway, but I'm glad we got a little more time without him on the throne. President Oaks was born in Provo, Utah in August of 1932. He and his late wife, June Dixon Oaks, are the parents of 6 children. She died in 1998, and in 2000, he married Kristen M. McMain in the Salt Lake Temple. Elder Oaks clerked for Chief Justice Earl Warren at the U.S. Supreme Court from 1957 to 1958. He practiced law in Chicago and then taught law at the University of Chicago. He was president of Brigham Young University from 1971 to 1980 and a justice of the Utah Supreme Court from 1980 until his resignation in 1984 when he accepted the call to the apostleship. And that's your special report for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.